Approve the minutes since we don't have that. So we're gonna move, all right, move right on into new business. Item number 1, public hearing to consider the advisability of the issuing a variance to allow a 200-foot self-supporting wireless communication tower at 2220 West Tawanda Avenue.
All right. Morning, gentlemen. So I'm going to walk you through the proposal, locations, our process, and the criteria that you'll review to make a decision today. So first, it's at 2220 West Tawanda. It's about 500 to 600 feet east of South Haverhill Road, which is on the west side of your screen, and just north of West Tawanda Avenue, there in the middle bottom of your screen. To give you a little bit more perspective here, this is a zoomed out view of the approximate location of the tower. You've got Central Avenue on the far north at the top of your screen. You have Sunset Road just off the bottom or the south end of the screen. The proposal, as you had mentioned, is by Parallel Infrastructure. They're proposing a 200-foot self-supporting tower with a 10-foot lightning rod on top. The approximate lease location and size is 100 by 100 feet, with the actual fenced-in compound, as I understand it, going to be about 50 by 50 feet. So we're here today because our regulations recommended a variance approach. In our supplementary district regulations, we have an area that talks about wireless communications facilities. And by zoning district, it allows different types of towers and different heights. And it says on the first bullet point there, it says new undisguised monopole facilities up to 65 feet in height in any residential district by special use permit. So what that means is that for any residential district, R1, R2, R3, this property being zoned R3, with a special use permit, which requires notification, a public hearing, a recommendation by Planning Commission, and a final determination by City Commission, an applicant may build up to 65 feet a monopole tower. A lot of steps. However, the code says a little bit further down from that, that if the zoning administrator determines that the wireless communication facility does not conform to the location design guidelines as written above, and this one is a different tower style as well as a greater height, the building permit should be denied, which we formally did. However, the final sentence says, process-wise, a denied building permit may be appealed by applying for a variance. So that's how we got here today. So Parallel Infrastructure applied for the building permit. We denied it based on the standards. They have since applied for the variance for you guys to review today. Our variances are regulated by the state of Kansas. It's called Kansas State Statute 12-759, and it's what gives all cities in the state of Kansas the authority and criteria to issue variances. The wording on that is to authorize in specific cases a variance from the specific terms of the regulations, which will not be contrary to the public interest and where, due to special conditions, a literal enforcement of the provision of the regulations in an individual case results in unnecessary hardship, and provided that the spirit of the regulation shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. So in essence, if there's a very special circumstance, this is the process that one would take to potentially amend part of the rules for this situation, and that's what we're doing. To review some of the criteria in your packets, as well as in your ordinances, in your ordinance books, that I know you guys read all the time, there are 5 criteria. It is laid out by that state statute as well as in our local zoning ordinance. The first is uniqueness. It says the variance requested arises from such a condition which is unique to the property in question and which is not ordinarily found in the same zone or districts and is not created by an action or actions of the property owner or the applicant. Adjacent property is the second one, the second criteria. It says the granting of the permit for the variance will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners represented in the application. Hardship. The strict application of the provisions of the zoning regulations from which a variance is requested will constitute an unnecessary hardship upon the applicant. The desire to increase profitability of the property may be an indication of hardship. It shall not be a sufficient reason by itself to justify the variance. The fourth is public interest. The variance desired will not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, or general welfare of the community. And last is spirit and intent. Granting of the variance will not be opposed to the general spirit and intent of the zoning regulations. So as you saw in my memo, our take on a few of these things is that, unfortunately, we don't feel that the application meets a number of this criteria. The property itself is unique in the way that is one of our few remaining large tracts of land prime for residential development. It has utilities, amenities, recreational opportunities. It's all right there. And so, as far as the uniqueness goes, it is unique because we just don't have many of these left. And the city, frankly, is just a little bit concerned about anything that could hinder the development of such a property. Adjacent property, we know that the tower would be visible from probably quite a great distance, though exact details on that effect, we would have to hire out consultants to determine exactly what that would be. Hardship. Ultimately, in the context of locating a tower, we are a rural community. We are surrounded by section after section of agricultural open space, and even a number of our industrial properties have quite a bit of open space available as well. Public interest. Going back to our first one, our 2030 comprehensive plan, as well as the rental rates, surveys, and housing studies done in the last decade show that in El Dorado, we have a high demand for residential development. And so this goes back to our focus on what this property is highest and best use could be, and just preventing anything that might hinder that. And lastly, the spirit and intent. Spirit and intent are very clear here. The purpose is to limit tall structures. This regulation applies to every residential district in the city. The zoning ordinance does allow taller structures and more types of structures on industrial and commercial properties. And there's many properties like that in town, especially on the north side of town, that do have wireless communication towers on them. But as far as residential, this is a pretty standard one. We're just preventing tall structures. So the second thing to consider today, our ordinance lays out the process. So they apply for a building permit, we denied it by the process, and then the process says, you guys can review this for a variance. However, at the same time, the zoning ordinance says this exact tower is prohibited. But despite it being prohibited, we still wanted to follow that process and put it before you guys to review today. So it is our staff interpretation that this copy that I put in your packet, the bottom line is exactly what's proposed. An undisguised, ground-mounted tower, other than a monopole, is strictly prohibited in every zoning district except for, on the far right, where it says P, I-1 and I-2 are two industrial districts in town. And to take it one step further, that same KSA 12759, the variance state statute, it also says down there, and I quote, such variance shall not permit any use not permitted by the zoning regulations in such a district. And the intent of that is that you guys can...
Sorry. No, it happened.
That was a jamming song. So what that means is that the Planning Commission's main role is to determine the zoning of districts and what uses are allowed in each. The Board of Zoning Appeals doesn't get that authority, but you get to make reductions to, say, parking requirements, which we did for the Performing Arts Center a couple years ago, and setback reductions, which we've done off and on over the years, say, rebuilding on old properties built in the early 1900s that when they were created, we didn't have a lot of regulations. So those are the type of variances we've done in the past. They did not affect the uses, whereas our interpretation is both that the zoning ordinance prohibits this, and that state statute also says that we are not able to issue a variance because it would be changing the land use that's prohibited. And this is just my brief summary that I just mentioned. Is our interpretation and our opinion and our analysis that it doesn't meet all the criteria. By state statute, you would have to make a determination, a majority of you, 3 of you, that the case meets all 5 criteria to vote to approve it. And furthermore, as I said, is also our interpretation that it's both prohibited by local law and state law. And so, with that being said, I'd like to invite Mr. Justin Anderson up. He is our applicant today, and he can tell you more about the proposal.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for your time. I'm not going to reiterate the design of the site unless you want me to. It's a 200-foot tower, 100-foot by 100-foot lease area. So as Mr. Shivers has pointed out, there are some guidelines that we need to consider for this application. The first one was the uniqueness of the property. This search area does encompass the northeast corner of the Butler campus, the Grizzly Villas and Bailey's Court Apartments, portions of the city land walking properties to the north, which I believe are owned by the American Legion, and as well as some properties to the south, which are actually in the county. At least 4 of these properties are in an overhead utility corridor, which we obviously can't build in those. We did approach probably other than American Legion property, the second largest landowner in the area, Mr. Fred Kropp. He was agreeable to a site at that location. However, this specific property or this specific location that is being applied for today has one of the existing carriers on the tower immediately to the west has a fixed wireless service on it, which means those apartments or whomever basically use a Wi-Fi transmitter to their router to their house. So our RF team or coverage team couldn't move the site that far to the south. So like I said, we had fixed wireless, and we also had no interest from Butler College. I don't think that intersection or that landscape type of area would have necessarily been the appropriate place for a tower. And then we had a couple of choices, right? The Grizzly Villas apartments, some American Legion property, which is a city park, or Mr. Adlisberger's property, which is where we're here today. The adjacent property, granted of this permit, will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. The proposed tower and existing tower have the same underlying zoning. They're both R3. So our proposed tower and the one immediately to the west are both R3. The one immediately to the west is 190 feet. It is closer to the apartments than us. It is closer to the right-of-way than us. It is it's now been carved out of its own, the larger property, which is where you see the Grizzly Villas apartments. I believe that there is some concern about the future development of this site for maybe apartments or a small subdivision. The Grizzly Villas apartments tract, that actual parcel is 7 acres. The parcel that I'm proposing this tower on is right at 7 acres. I think 6.97 acres. So there are no adverse effects to the development of the property. There are no adverse effects to any residents near the property. The nearest resident is actually Mr. Fred Kropp. He lives to the southwest of here. Immediately below is mixed use of storage buildings. I think there's Talon Games is at that location. To the north, you have apartments, which are either short-term or long-term rentals. Farther to the west, you have Butler College, and to the east, you have Bailey's Court Apartments. As far as the hardship, the strict application of the provisions of the zoning regulations of which variance is requested will constitute unnecessary hardship upon the property owner represented in this application. As I mentioned, the area to the south, per my discussion with the city, is within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of El Dorado and would require a conditional use permit, correct? A site in Butler County?
If I recall, that was going to be with Butler County.
I believe it was a a multi-jurisdictional. We can look back through emails.
That's fine.
So
It's a complicated area.
yeah, down where the old drive-in theater used to be on Mr. Kropp's property. That was another location we had looked at. The property subject to this application would need to go through a special use permit if we could have it only at 65 feet. However, that height limit, to my knowledge, I don't believe the city had any scientific standard for the basis of that 65 feet, nor were there any wireless infrastructure providers consulted for the industry standards. Towers of 65 feet would not allow for co-location and would not allow to provide needed coverage for the intended anchor tenant. In this case, that intended anchor tenant is a current tenant on the other tower. The existing tower had to receive the same or similar height variance and submit the same engineer's fall zone letter as we did We are applying for the exact same consideration that that existing tower had. Denying this consideration would be causing some type of discrimination. Why was that applied or approved in, I believe, 2007, and it can't be approved in 2021? The same underlying zoning. We're actually farther away from the right-of-way. We're farther away from residences, and we have a larger property to further develop. Same height, same lease area, so on and so forth. The public interest to the site. As I mentioned, we did consider other properties, but it really came down to existing customer expectations. As I mentioned, we have fixed wireless. Our underlying anchor tenant has existing fixed wireless, and we simply could not move the site too far south. That would have been Mr. Croft's property. Historically, a new tower placement has a stigma that people won't want to live or build next to that tower. However, after multiple studies that have been done in Shawnee County, Johnson County, other large Kansas metro areas, that has proven to not be false. There's actually a net zero decrease on property values. One site that I specifically did is at 63rd and Mission in Prairie Village, directly across the street from Mission Hills. That Mission Hills property owner did claim that it was going to decrease his property values when the site initially went up in 2010. We had to modify that site in 2016, and his property values had actually increased. Another stigma is people won't want to build houses next to towers. That actually has happened on the Kansas City, Missouri side, around 126th and Warnell. These are real life cases, not hypotheticals, where the tower was already there and it was a lot that somebody had bought. They put up a tower and people built an entire neighborhood around it. They're roughly $700,000 homes. The size impact of the tower should also not impact the future development of this parcel. Our project is 10,000 square feet with a short, fenced in 2,500 square feet with a short access road on nearly a 7-acre parcel. As I mentioned before, the Grizzly Apartments is also a 7-acre parcel, and they have a lot of additional green space. So it's not a compact development, you might say. We did discuss the placement of the tower with the property owner, Mr. Atlasberger. He actually preferred this location in the southwest corner because he was taking in mind that future development. In fact, he has a for sale sign out there right now at the kind of the crest of the property. Let's see, we understand that a 200-foot tower is much higher than the 65-foot permitted. However, there are no industrial districts around here for our coverage. Most of your industrial is farther to the north, some west, and in the south. We can't just turn up our sites and hope that they work better. Digital technology does not work that way. If we built sites that were 65 feet, then you'd have a lot of extra sites in some very dense residential areas. Our competitor's representative is here to argue against this site. His underlying landowner is the American Legion, which I believe is also here. They do own the underlying property on the existing tower and a lot of the properties to the north. So I would ask you take their opposition into consideration, as it's kind of paramount to one business opposing competition of the business across the street from them. That's about all I have. Again, just to recap some ideas. Why is this site so controversial if there's an existing site just to the west that has all the same parameters? That site to the west is 190 feet tall. It's a self-support tower. It's on R3 property. Our site is 200 feet. It is in the same amount of lease space. It's on 7 acres, and we're asking for variance as they would have had. So I would bring your attention to those facts. think about if denying one tower over the other is discrimination, which is not allowed vis-a-vis the Telecom Act of 1996. I think that's section 704, as well as Kansas legislation 66/2019. I know we're not here for all of that today. This is a land use application. However, this specific land use has a direct competitor next door that's already had this same process, and they were approved for this same type of application. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. That was a lot of stuff there. Wanted to get it all out there at first.
I don't think I have any. Do you have any questions for him? Anyone?
I don't have one.
I don't for him anyway.
If you think of a question later,
I got plenty
during
of
the
questions.
public hearing,
Not
I
for
mean-
him.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna be right there.
Okay, all right,
I appreciate your time.
thanks.
Thank you.
And Chairman, I'd like to add just one small note to the end of that. As far as the existing permits for the tower to the west, if I recall, that was built in 2002, and since that time, we've had 2 major zoning regulations updates and a number of minor updates. So it is true that over the years, our regulations do change and evolve. If I recall, at that point in time, that I was able to find in my files, there was not a zoning requirement that was special such as this. However, since those 2 major updates and minors, there is now a requirement for it. And I get this question all the time. People say, well, this guy has this fence, why can't I? This house is too close to the road, why can't I do that? Or his lot's this small, why can't I do that? And the truth is that over the years, as we learn more, these things all change. Our fence requirements have changed, our roadway requirements, our parking requirements, lot sizes, all these things over time slowly evolve and change. So there's a lot of things that are existing today that is what's called legal non-conforming. So everything is fine with them. They met the rules at the time that were in place at the time of permitting. It just means non-conforming. They don't meet today's most updated rules. And we have that all over town, and so do most cities.
Can you tell me when that previous tower was approved? Was that before the villas and everything was there then?
I believe so.
So
That
would the
was golf
zoning,
course then, wasn't it?
right,
It was a golf course. I took the aerials back. Yeah, it was a golf course back.
would the zoning have been different then than R3?
Actually, I think that little square, however it's gotten separated off, is R1. Now, the way our codes are worded, and it was recently amended to fix this, any newly annexed land would be automatically zoned R1. It's like our most restrictive, like single-family type of zoning.
Right.
And it used to be, and there's still portions of the golf course that are zoned as, because a lot of the golf course was not buildable, it's a floodplain and stuff like that. So I believe it's actually R1, the apartments around it are R3 to allow that
Okay.
complex.
So that was changed then when the villa was put into R3, I assume, at that point?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, yeah, we can open the public hearing now.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Patrick Edwards. I'm an attorney at Stinson in Wichita. I represent SBA, which is the tower directly to the west. And I'm here to oppose the variance request by parallel. I'd like to cover several things. The first thing is discussing kind of the location of our tower being SBA versus the proposed parallel tower. You guys have several maps. You have one right there. This is two maps. One is a satellite view, and the other is a street view of the SBA tower, the existing SBA tower, which is the black circle, and the proposed parallel tower, which is the X there. And as you'll see, they are 264 feet apart. So that would be how close these two towers are. SBA's tower is 100, I believe Mr. Anderson said 190 feet tall. It's my understanding is 195 feet. Maybe it's the 5-foot difference might be with the lightning rod. Our tower, as Mr. Shippers mentioned, was built in 2002. And although it's 19 years old, it's technologically up to date. We already serve AT&T, which is the anchor tenant that Mr. Anderson mentioned. We serve them at 188 feet. to be really clear here, AT&T has never complained to SBA about this site. Said it's said that they've never said the existing site is insufficient. They've never said do this, or this, or we will or we'll build another tower right next door. And in fact, upon learning of the variance application, SBA actually reached out to AT&T and offered them almost a 52% rent reduction to keep them on our site. We've been trying to work with our tenant for sure. Our tower has capacity and capabilities to install all the modern technology. That's up to AT&T. They're our tenant. They can put on what they want. And we also have room on our tower for new carriers. So it's not a situation where this proposed tower is necessary because we're full. We have room. So if a new carrier wants to approach us about coming in, we have room for that. The next thing I'd like to hand out to you are propagation maps. And what these maps show is they compare service on the existing tower with what service would like to be on the proposed tower. The long and short of it is, since they're comparable heights, and they are 264 feet apart, this new tower will not increase service in any way, shape, or form. The residents of El Dorado are going to have, if the proposed tower is built, the residents of El Dorado are not going to know which tower their carrier is on, and they're not going to see an improvement in any way, shape, or form. And I should explain the prop maps. So these are several pages, and what we did was we compared the existing site. So the first page is at 700 megahertz, which is a frequency, and we compared it at 188 feet, which is where AT&T is currently at. We had seen some information. If you go to the second page, it lists it's the existing site at 225 feet. And what we did there was we had seen some information on a federal filing by Parallel that suggested this tower might be 225 feet. So if that were the case, if AT&T wanted a higher tower, which you come to find out, it appears that today they're just asking for 200 feet, we were going to request to extend our tower to match the height of the proposed tower. But this shows what the coverage would be at 225 feet. At the third page is, so the first two pages are the existing towers at the current height and then the proposed height if we were to extend it up. The third page is the proposed site. So the proposed parallel tower at, again, 225 feet, because we thought, based on the federal filing, what they were requesting. The long and short of it is, if you compare the first three pages, good coverage is blue and green, spotty coverage is yellow, and poor coverage is red. The coverage on these first three pages are virtually identical. The same thing, it's the same structure on pages 4, 5, and 6, just with a different frequency with 850 megahertz. So the page 4 is SBA's existing site at 188 feet, which is where AT&T is. Fifth page is our current SBA tower at 225 feet if we were to do the extension. And then the sixth page is the proposed parallel tower at 225 feet. Going on, pages, I guess it would be 7, 8, and 9 are the same structure, just with 1900 megahertz, just a different frequency. And then the last three pages are the same structure, just at 2100 megahertz. So it's all just different frequencies, and it's comparing the difference in coverage. And the long and short of it is, there's virtually no difference in coverage when you compare the two towers. This proposed tower will not improve service for El Dorado residents. Now I'm going to turn to the El Dorado zoning regulations, and I've got to confess I'm flying a little blind here because I don't have copies. I submitted a core request to the city, not to Mr. Shivers, but to the clerk last Tuesday, and I have not received a response to that. So I was trying to get a copy of everything that Parallel submitted. That hasn't been produced to me yet. So we were able to come up with the notice of hearing that was published. And then I have 3 pages. The first page is an application. The second page is a warranty deed that has the legal description, and the third page is a map. And then the other document I have is is one of the design documents that we, that I believe was shown earlier. The only reason I'm telling you that is, based on the documents that I have provided, if there was nothing further that was provided by parallel, I believe the application itself for variance is insufficient. My basis for that is if you go to Article 12, subsection 3B2A, it says the applicant shall submit a statement in writing justifying the variance requested, indicating specifically the enforcement provisions of the zoning regulations from which the variance is requested, and outlining in detail the manner in which it is believed the application will meet each of the 5 conditions set out in section 2B3 of this article. So the 5 factors Mr. Shivers went through are supposed to be laid out, essentially the applicant's argument is supposed to be laid out in the application itself. To my knowledge, based on what I have, that was not, there's nothing in here that, it doesn't identify the variance requested. It just says application being submitted under guidelines of city code and state citing bill 2031 or 2131, and it doesn't have the 5 factors or their position. So it was a little difficult to prepare for this because of that. Again, with the caveat that if there's additional documents produced by parallel that I didn't get, that may be, take that for what it's worth. But if this is it, the application is insufficient on its face, and you guys can deny it on that basis for the lack of the information required in that subsection in Article 12. Turning gears a little bit, I also think that the way I read the zoning regs is a little different than the way Mr. Shivers reads them. It's my reading, and I'll grab a copy. The way I read the zoning regs is that the variance was only allowed for the setback requirement that's in Article 6. The setback requirement says all ground-mounted towers shall be set back from all property lines a distance equal to or greater than the height of the proposed structure. The setback may be equal to the maximum distance the structure is designed to fall if there's a licensed engineer's report. I don't have a licensed engineer's report. There may have been one submitted, but it wasn't produced to me. It's my understanding, though, that the variance, the section that was put up on the TV talked about if the communication facility does not conform to the location/design guidelines. Though I see location meaning the setback. It doesn't say the height guidelines, which if you go to the front, and I'm sorry this is kind of detailed, but if you go to the heading of that section, it says location/height guidelines, and then later in the next subsection is design guidelines. When it talks about the variance, it talks about a variance for the location and the design. It doesn't say the height guidelines. That's a long way of saying it's my reading that the variance can only be allowed for the setback. Even with the setback variance, if that was ever granted, it's my reading this would still have to go through the special use permit process with the variance. So I read this as being, your regs as being 2-part. If you grant a variance for the setback, they still need to go through the special use process for the height issue, because there's the statute that or the subsection that allows for a variance only talks about, again, location and design. It doesn't talk about height. The subsection right above that says new undisguised monopole facilities up to 65 feet in height in any residential district by special use permit. So again, I still see this as meaning there needs to be one more step here, even if the variance was granted. And that would be going through the normal special use process. With all that being said, I agree with Mr. Shivers on the 5 factors with respect to the variance itself. Literal, we don't need to go through them all. I'll be brief because you guys have seen them before. But literal enforcement of your zoning regulations will not result in an unnecessary hardship. Again, it's not a hardship; it's unnecessary hardship. I don't believe here there's an unnecessary hardship. The next subsection talks about extraordinary or exceptional circumstances. I don't believe there's extraordinary or exceptional circumstances here. And this is, it's not a unique property. this will result in a negative visual impact. If there's I mean, let's just be honest. Towers serve a purpose. They're not pretty. You need towers. You don't need more towers than you need. The negative visual impact of having 2 towers right there will, you know, it's right next to the college. It's directly south of the football stadium. It's right next to the apartment complex. You don't need, you need them, but you don't need more than you need, and it'll be a negative visual impact. And so that's kind of all I've got for you guys. I understand that I represent a competitor, but for what it's worth, I mean, I'm just asking you to enforce your zoning regulations. That's it. You don't need to pick sides. You have a basis to deny this without picking sides. So I just request that you deny the variance application. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I'm not sure who to ask, but, so is this a duplication of services?
What's that?
Is this a duplication of services?
It would be. I mean,
It won't be. AT&T is looking to leave their tower to go to our tower.
I didn't hear it.
Are you, so you're just a tower provider for AT&T?
That's
So-
correct.
Okay,
Parallel Infrastructure has entered into a master service agreement with AT&T and Verizon, for that matter, for lots of towers across the country. There's been plenty of these arguments. Some of them have gone to court, and SBA has lost those arguments. Basically, it's a competitor asking you, the jurisdiction, to not allow the competitor to be next door.
So what I would tell you is, we haven't lost in Liberal and Fort Scott, for example, they've sided with us. We have not lost, there have been jurisdictions that have agreed with us. In any event, all I'm asking you to do is enforce your zoning regulations. We have, again, AT&T is the impetus behind this move. We've never received any complaints. In fact, again, as I stated earlier, upon learning about this variance application, we reached out to them about a 52% decrease in their rent amount, and we have not heard back. So I just ask that you enforce your zoning regulations as written. And like I said, any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I'm good.
Are you representing the property owner, the Legion?
No, I'm just
No,
representing,
okay.
I'm just representing SBA.
Okay.
Jay, I have a question for you, I guess, is what he's stating, is that good information that variance could or could not be permitted, and then it will still have to go in for a special use permit? And that would be approved or denied by who, and what process would that go through?
Our legal counsel would guide us through it all.
So that would be all on your side, not the city commission or?
And it could be, as I said, we would take her guidance. I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
And so it is our interpretation to start with this process.
Right.
I think we interpret this a little bit differently, and there's some room for interpretation, but the way we read it is that this is the first step.
Right, okay. All
And
right.
certainly, I mean, I read it differently. I don't think that, I mean, you can read it. This is one that's up for debate.
Sure,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks. Come on up.
I'm Vern Barker. I'm also an officer at the American Legion. We're here to oppose this proposal for 2 reasons. Number one, we have a vested interest in the existing tower, have had for many years. And going forward, we feel like that it would subject our interest to a lack of income for the American Legion to keep our doors open and support our veterans. Number two, we do have the property that backs up to the Adelsberger property that is for sale, and we feel like that it could encumber the sale of that piece of property in the future.
Okay.
So, other than that, we do oppose this proposal in going forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions for them? All right.
Can I get a little rebuttal,
Can I approve?
Sorry?
Can I approve?
Yeah.
So, just a couple of items I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page with. I would ask staff, did you receive a complete application?
I believe so. Now, to the information about the variance stuff, we had talked about it on the phone before, and stuff. I don't know, did you do the full letter on it? I don't
I
recall.
believe I submitted it too,
Did you?
yes.
Okay. Your packets are huge, by the way.
Right.
Carry on.
And was correct public notice provided?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it is now news to me that SBA has offered a 52% rent reduction. That's great. If AT&T decides that they don't want to go on this tower, they won't build, parallel infrastructure won't build this tower. So the question is, if you approve this tower, is there another tower company that's going to come down here in 3 weeks and ask for another tower on Fred Kropp's property? Perhaps. Nothing's keeping them from applying. What you do have to understand is what's the market going to demand? If you have 4 restaurants on 4 corners and they're all charging $5 for a cheeseburger, is that too many restaurants? Do you not deserve that choice as a consumer, which AT&T is a client of these tower companies? There's also a case, SBA Towers versus Zoning Hearing Board of Logan Township out of Pennsylvania. That is actually between Unity Towers and Verizon, where SBA was suing to not allow a tower. And then there's another memorandum that was written by the Franklin County, Kansas Planning Commission and staff, where SBA was asking for this same type of thing. Please don't allow this new tower. It's going to be detrimental to our business. Both of which found that the KSA 66-2019 was applicable, and in SBA versus Zoning Hearing Board of Logan Township in Pennsylvania, courts did rule that Logan Township was in their authority to approve that new tower. So they offered a 52% rent reduction. I just did a site similar to this for a different company in Huntsville, Alabama, where the tower company, the existing tower company, was Crown Castle. At the 11th hour, they said, oh no, we're going to lose this revenue. We'll renegotiate. So we didn't build that tower. We went through all of this process. We got to the building permit stage. We did not build that tower because the lease revenue became such that AT&T was okay with. It's an unnecessary hardship. Well, one could agree that an unscientific or, I guess, parameter of height being 65 feet, that's very unheard of in our industry unless it's at a golf course or some type of stealth tower in a community. We don't build 65 feet towers. You can't co-locate on them. You'd have a carrier at 65 feet, and then nobody would want to go at 55 feet or 45 feet unless there were houses all around. As you can see, this is not a densely populated area. Also, I would mention, and also there's a massive utility corridor running all through here. So these properties couldn't be considered. This property was apartments and partial floodplain. We talked to Fred Kropp, who lives right here, and he preferred us to go here. Again, more utility corridor, and then Butler College, and we didn't feel like that intersection was necessarily the best place for a tower, because it would put a tower in a pretty highly visible area. Having a second tower in this area, is that a lot of visual pollution in the air? Well, there's a massive utility corridor, there's a substation, there's an existing tower, so I would argue that it's not going to add a whole lot as far as that goes. Is it another tower in the air? Absolutely. Are they pretty? No. Are they necessary? Yes. Does more competition drive down cost for consumers? It absolutely does. Have cell tower devices gotten more expensive? Yes, because they do a lot more. Has the service gotten a lot cheaper for what you get? Yes, it has. And then as far as the public opposition, I can appreciate the American Legion's, first of all, what they do for our vets. Secondly, as a property owner, they have a vested interest in this opposition. So I would ask you to weigh that and why they're in opposition to it. It's not because they don't like the looks of the tower or it's going to lessen their property value. They have a tower already. They probably get rev share, which means they get a percentage of whatever extra rent goes on that tower. So right now, Verizon and AT&T are on that tower. So it's in SBA's best interest, if they want to be the best tenant, is to lower their rents a lot more than 52%, because that's more than what they're charging in addition to what the other smaller tower companies. So a little bit of background, American Tower, Crown Castle, and SBA are the big three tower companies in this country. Crown Castle and American Tower International. They sat down with all of the various carriers, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and at the time Sprint, and said, the carrier said, we're paying way too much, you're charging us to take stuff off, you're charging us to put stuff on, we can't maintain that rent level. So ATC and Crown Castle, for the most part, adjusted all of their rents. SBA chose not to. It sounds like maybe they are starting to now, because Pat and I do this song and dance every single week at various places across Kansas right now. He has a counterpart in Missouri that's doing the same thing. So just ask yourselves why they're in opposition to it. Are they opposed to a tower? I don't think so, because they apply for towers all the time. They apply for towers under some of these same guidelines that the Telecom Act and Kansas legislation both protect. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you
I
might
do have a
have.
couple questions, actually.
Yes.
So on these maps that he gave me, as far as like the megahertz coverages areas,
It's going to be exactly the same.
it's right. And if this tower was in a different location within El Dorado, whether it would be IR, the other zonings for industrial areas, wouldn't you still have the same coverage?
No, so we can't, so currently, is that third or center where those two towers are up on in the?
They're up by 6th.
Sixth,
Streets.
that's right. So
They're
currently
near
up
Haverhill.
at Sixth and Haverhill, there are two towers right across the street from one another. The one on the east side is actually pretty close to single-family residential. If you put a tower up there, frankly, these carriers are likely on those towers.
Okay.
You can't turn up the service, as it were.
So you basically are triangulating the area.
Yeah, so you have a heavy population of technology at Butler campus. You have a heavy population of technology at the Grizzly Villas, as well as Bailey Court, and then an industrial complex to the north. You have a large amount of heavy single-family residential to the east. So all of those products, or consumers, if you will, take up a massive amount of data at different points during the day, right? From 9 a.m. to probably, I don't know, when do college classes stop now? 7, something like that. Butler campus is probably lit up like a Christmas tree. And then after all of that goes, and all those kids go back to their apartments, then those apartments are lit up like a Christmas tree, right? And it just keeps going like that. So you have to have key sites, taller sites, and then middle sites, and then shorter sites, right? Shorter sites when you get into like DAS or small cell, which are about every 500 feet. If you go down to Wichita, you'll see them all over the place. College Hill, the Delano district. They're all over the place, and they have their own set of rules, right? We have tolling agreements and things like that to use right-of-way infrastructure. So this site is not going to provide different coverage. In fact, it's designed to provide the same exact coverage, because AT&T is looking to keep their consumers that they've already started to provide service for. They just simply want to pay less rent. So this is an argument simply for, is a tower going to be detrimental to this area in any way? Can you not develop a 7-acre site if you take up 10,000 square feet of it? It seems like you still can, given the apartment buildings. And is it right to have free enterprise in this country, or should SBA just have the monopoly on a tower in that area?
So you're saying this is the area you need to be in?
Yeah.
And Jay, you're saying that south is an option because that would be in the county, but it also is restricted by city as well, being across the street?
We have an agreement with Butler County to apply a portion of our zoning to this 3-mile area around the city.
Right.
And so where this exactly falls within that, we would work with Butler County to determine the appropriate process for it. This isn't a request we've had since I've been here, the 7 years I've been here. So
Okay.
If I
we
could,
would work with them.
sorry to interrupt, if I could further your point. Yeah, so when we get assigned an area to find a new site for, it's called a search ring. I have a copy of it in my folder. Basically, like I said, it encompasses Northwest Haverhill and Tawanda down to the water treatment area at Butler College, and then this mostly vacant, albeit utility corridor that's mostly owned by Fred Kropp. My A candidate was actually Mr. Kropp's property in the county. That was what I thought would be the best site. However, I have a client who has an anchor tenant, AT&T, that says, no, technically it has to be up here, because if we go down there, all the people in those apartments are gonna lose their fixed wireless service, which is a little Wi-Fi module that talks to their router in their apartment. And that's probably their best option for internet, I don't know. But there were other options. We did talk, we had 2 candidates on this site. The utility corridor really kind of took away a lot of it. Butler campus took away a lot of it as well. So to your point, I did have a different candidate, and it was my preferred candidate. As a site acquisition person, I felt like we were gonna be able to probably come to better underlying rent business terms with Mr. Croft, maybe move a little faster, maybe not have a variance process, but rather conditional use. I know it's hard to, prove hardships. However, I do feel like there being an existing tower right next door, what is the logic of saying this tower doesn't work in this location if the one right next door to it does? And again, I would point out, there is some discrimination language in the Telecom Act of '96 that says it doesn't matter when your code was approved, it still has to make apples be apples. If that site wasn't there, we would have a totally different conversation about that.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for him anyway?
No.
Good. Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
I guess there's nobody else, we can close the,
Chairman Dean, I have a question for Mr. Parker. if you-
okay, yeah. Come on up. Sure.
So let me get this straight. Your opposition is to, if the new tower is built, you would lose income from the existing tower?
That's correct.
That's what
That's what
you're
we're-
sure of that, or you're afraid of that?
We're afraid of that.
Because the AT&T would transfer to the new tower,
That's
which
correct.
that would benefit Mr. Adelsberger.
Yes.
That's his property.
Yes.
So that you think the old tower would no longer have service?
They would,
And-
if they lose that carrier, they would have to be looking for a second carrier to replace the one that would leave, so that would.
And your organization depends on that income?
Yes, we do. That's correct.
Since 2007, is that right?
Yes.
2002.
2002 is when it was built, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, I guess we'll close the public hearing and I guess go into discussion of what we want to do is amongst ourselves, so, I guess anybody want to start on that? Because I have a few things, I guess, but, kind of way I'm looking at this is, I guess, is that we always look for the highest and best use of a piece of property. And I think, in my opinion, when that tower was put in, even though the zoning was still the same, maybe the requirements were not the same when they were done. You didn't have the villas, you didn't have the field, you had basically a lumberyard across the street, a bunch of commercial to the south. At that point in time, the highest, best use probably was that tower. But now that the things have changed, or at least the way everything's changed down there the last 15 years, to me, I don't know if that's, maybe that's not the best use for that piece of property next to it, as an additional tower, although competition's great for any business or any consumer, I guess. That's neither here nor there as far as we're concerned. We're concerned about the, I guess, the zoning of the property and what the restrictions and the requirements are. So I don't know if anybody else has any input on that or has something to say about that.
Well, I feel that the city's staff's stance spells out the rule that we're living by in our city. And the other arguments, although they're economic and they're fair market and their competition and different arguments like that, I feel that we still should follow the rules of the zoning and deny this, is my opinion right now.
Ready for motion?
Well, if you guys are, if you don't have anything else to say or want to talk about.
I don't.
I think it's a redundancy on it, and you're gonna get one carrier, leaving another for another tower. I mean, if we deny the one tower, what's AT&T gonna do? Are they going to take it to court, or are they going to just remain where they're at? And of course, obviously, these guys can't answer that. I mean, we would need somebody from AT&T to answer that, but unfortunately, they're not here, so that's kind of my input into it.
And board member, I would hesitate to weigh in too much into the specific product, service, or even specific companies with this,
Right.
since we're a land use board.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
'cause any and all that can
that's
change.
for them guys to determine,
Right.
not us. But,
Right.
does anybody want to make a motion then, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to deny the parking variance. Requested 2220 West Tawanda Avenue to find in the stated request does not meet the variance criteria stated in the zoning regulations in Kansas statute 12-539, 759.
You want a second?
I think we need to amend that. He's talking a parking variance, not the height of the tower and the tower style variance.
Well, I agree with that. But
I just read what he had.
Actually, on the, that's what
I
we're
mean,
here
can
for, though.
we amend that, or do we need a whole new?
Yeah, is that on the memo?
It says
Yes,
parking
yes.
variance on
My
the.
word, I apologize, guys, my mistake.
So do we need to make a whole new motion?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. I couldn't figure that out because I was trying to figure out why it said parking
I don't
variance.
know how I missed that, I apologize, guys.
Okay, forget that last one. I move to deny the proposal height and tower style variance at 2220 West Tawanda Avenue for the reason found in the staff memo and heard at this meeting.
Wait, now, 1 second.
That make more sense?
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Let me see yours. Yeah. That's what it said. At least mine says that too.
Mine says it.
That's it.
No, okay, all right. My apologies, guys. Man. Thank you for clarifying.
Do we have any staff items that,
If you guys would like to take the moment to elect or re-elect or nominate another chairman for the next year or to the next meeting, and or a vice chair that would run the meeting if the chair is gone, that might be a good time.
Real quick, Jay.
Yes, sir.
What was the exact reason for it to know?
I just don't, my personal reason is because.
Well, and the way it's worded is by the reasons in the staff report and
Statute,
discussed at the
zoning
meeting.
law.
which was everything except for the parking.
Had to end on a good note, I guess.
When are minutes available?
Oh, probably next week.
Okay.
Yeah. This was a rather long meeting, so maybe next week. Unless you'd like to swing by my office to help.
If you can come to Florida, I'll be happy to help you out.
Well,
Get you out on a boat and catch some fish.
hear that, Scott? I'm just kidding. So that's up to you guys if you'd like to consider, whether that's still Eddie or someone else.
I move we let Eddie continue.
I knew he was gonna do that.
Yep.
Chairman,
And this is informal.
Second.
okay?
I guess they'll stay for a little longer.
Hey, one meeting
You're doing a
every,
great job.
one meeting every 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone interested in being a vice chair? So if Eddie can't make the next meeting, you can run it?
I nominate Shane.
Shane can do it, yeah.
I'm gonna nominate him before he nominates me.
All
All
right.
right. Okay.
Meeting adjourned then.
That's all I have,
All
Chairman.
right.
I heard yesterday,
What?
I heard yesterday that homeless shelter's gotta move.